when more information comes out, but that's breaking news here. Tracy Campbell is with us. Tracy, you are a history professor at the University of Kentucky.
Indeed. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us tonight at Left Bank Books at 7 o'clock at the Central West End?
It is on the 10th Street, downtown.
Downtown, okay. Yeah. Left Bank Books, downtown, 7 p.m. for a book signing and a book reading. Your new book called The Gateway Arch. Why is a professor of Kentucky so enamored with our arch?
That's a good question. A lot of people ask me that over the years. I'm someone who's interested in social history, politics, economics, and I guess I was at the arch maybe a decade ago when people were standing by, and this one woman came out and asked, "What is this supposed to be? What is it? What does it do?"
Right.
And that's not a question you get when you go to most monuments. You don't ask that when you go to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, right? Or the Statue of Liberty. And I had written a biography many years ago and enjoyed it, but I couldn't find a person who interested me as much, so I thought, why not try an inanimate object?
There you go. I think the Gateway Arch is as beautiful and as magnificent as Michelangelo's David. I think it's in there as some of the greatest pieces of art the world has ever created.
We went down there last night, and I just watched people, and it reminded me in 1947 when the jury first saw the arch as a model. They said it produced a peculiarly happy feeling, and people were happy down there last night. Why? I don't think they're feeling good about Lewis and Clark and the opening of the West. It's because it's a beautiful work of what I think is sculpture,
right?
And it is monumental. You can't believe how big it is till you actually get underneath it and see how did they build this thing.
Right.
And it is beautiful. There's no doubt about it.
It's also, I've lived in St. Louis 13 years, and I've seen it from every angle, at every point of time, at every point of day, at every sunlight. And it's so simplistic, and yet it changes all the time.
Yeah, I've been down there, I don't know how many times, but every time I see a new angle.
Yeah. Yeah, and it looks different, but it's so simple. That's what's so magnificent about it.
Right. Arches are relatively simple, but when you get into the engineering of it, which I don't know as well as a lot of people,
right,
they're extraordinarily complex. But that's why I think when people get to the top of it and look down and realize there's nothing under them, they start understanding why they need to take those geometry classes back a few years ago.
Tracy Campbell, our guest, he'll be at Left Bank Books downtown tonight for a book signing and a book reading. His book is The Gateway Arch. What did you want to know about the Gateway Arch? Give us what'd you find out?
Well, I think our built environment has a lot of clues politically and socially and economically about who we are. They just don't fall out of the sky. And I don't care whether it's a cathedral, a skyscraper, or something like the Gateway Arch. There's a history of how these things are created. And I wanted to see what the human story was behind this mysterious yet, as you said, beautiful monument. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to see what the politics were about. I mean, all buildings have politics. They all have economics. Somebody's got to pay for it. Mm-hmm. Somebody's going to have to lose. Somebody's going to have to win. And I just wanted to look at it through the lens of the jaundiced lens of a historian.
I have done this show on the show before, and that is we in this area had a hard time building a Mississippi River bridge. Mm-hmm. Very much needed. We needed more lanes over the highway. Nobody wanted to pay for it. Nobody wanted to build it. Everybody was arguing over it. I often ask myself, how did they ever come together to decide to build the world's largest croquet wicket?
Right.
I mean, how did they all agree to that?
Well, they didn't. That's the whole point. It took about 3 decades, and it had to be at a certain point, I think, in American history. It had to be between the 40s and the 60s when we were really flush with funds, that we were sending people to the moon, that we were thinking, let's just do it, and we'll figure out how we get there once we're there.
Right.
And that's kind of how the arch was built, which is, we're not sure how we're going to get those internal cars up to the top, but we'll figure it out eventually.
Right. It was the best of what America had.
At the time, yeah. And, I mean, we couldn't do that today.
Because we choose not to.
Well, the funds, I mean, think about it. It was a $30 million project when it was proposed in 1935, which was about the same amount of money it took to build the Pentagon. So we're talking about an enormous amount of funds that, we were, even in the Depression, we're in a better situation, I think, than today to fund those kinds of objects.
But I mean, we chose to do it in whenever we. First idea of a monument to who? Thomas Jefferson, Napoleon for being dumb enough to sell it to us? What, Lewis? What was the idea?
That would have been an interesting monument to Napoleon, wouldn't it? I'm already dreaming what that could have looked like.
Would have been a lot smaller.
In the middle of the 30s,
Give me a little love on that. It could have been a little smaller. That was not bad. All right. Sorry.
In case my mother's watching, no, I'm not going to say anything.
Okay. All right.
In the middle of the 1930s, cities were struggling. The unemployment rates were beyond anything we can imagine now. So the notion was, how can we get federal jobs in here? And so a WPA project was proposed by the city. That was rejected. So when they hit upon the idea of a presidential monument, FDR, the New Deal, bit and said that might be something we'd be willing to do. And so the notion was, well, why not make it toward Jefferson? And the opening of the West and Louisiana Purchase and Lewis and Clark. So it was kind of an afterthought, but it fit for the location, obviously.
So this is in 1935?
1935.
Okay, it wasn't completed till 1963.
65.
65, okay. So they cleared the land when?
They cleared the land rather quickly. By 1941, it was a parking lot.
How did they clear the land? Did they had to buy up on the land? Was it eminent domain?
Oh, yes.
So they just came in and said, we're taking this land.
Right. It's under eminent domain, and that's part of why I enjoy doing this. Is I think the question is, who owns the land? Why would some people be willing to sell, others not? Because there were lawsuits. There were a lot of people saying we don't want to move. But when I looked, I saw that bankers and a lot of real estate companies own this land. It was quite a windfall. You could get 65% above appraised values, which in the 1930s, in the middle of the Depression, was quite a gift. And then the surrounding land necessarily, their values rose in value.
Right.
Exactly.
What was the land before? Was it shantytown? What was it? What was there?
Well, you've got 40 square blocks of some of the most historic buildings, I think, in the United States. I say in the book, this is really a book about a really small little piece of land and what happened to it over a long period of time, but not all pieces of land are created equal. This is one of the most contested pieces of land anywhere. You had some of the great cast iron buildings anywhere in the world, because of the fire in the 1800s, they were rebuilt. You had buildings where presidential candidates were nominated. The notion was that it was all shantytown and empty, but when I looked at the evidence, it seems that there was more economic activity in a lot of places than we thought. 5,000 people were working there, 300 businesses were operating. So this was an area of buildings, various kinds of buildings, the kind of multi-use buildings that city planners now hope to have neighborhoods surround,
right,
to live and walk and work.
So you're saying that if it would have stayed, it would have now been the new hip area of St. Louis.
Well, as historians, we can't do that. We can't say, here's what would have happened.
Right.
But I think it's worthwhile just to ask the question, because who knows? At one point, Walt Disney was thinking about a possible second Disneyland in this area. And that didn't happen, obviously, but one has to wonder what St. Louis would have looked like, wonder what the area would have looked like had that worked out.
Tracy Campbell, our guest. The book is The Gateway Arch. He'll be at Left Bank Books tonight for a book signing and a book reading, the Left Bank Books downtown. Will you stick around for another segment?
I'll be happy to.
Fascinating stuff. Also fascinating that a book like this wasn't written before, right? I mean, this is just a wealth of a lot of good new information.
Well, it took me 8 years, so these
took
things.
The Arch 20 years to build, so it took you half of the time. Tracy Campbell, our guest. Hang tight. Will you take a couple questions too?
Sure.
All right, stick around. More questions for Tracy Campbell, the author of The Gateway Arch. He'll be at Left Bank Books tonight, book signing and a book reading. Eero Saarinen, the man who came up with the idea, never lived to see the completion of this.
No.
He was fired from the Sydney Opera House, right?
Well, he was one of the jurors who had to select one of them, but yeah, there was a story about whether he had been fired.
Okay. I thought he was, but that's one of the great monuments and one of the great buildings the world's ever seen. He did the TWA terminal in JFK, which is now something else. I know it's not the TWA terminal, but he's one of the world's greatest architects. how did he come up with this idea for this simplistic arch? And it takes a pretty brilliant mind and a pretty giant ego to say, this is it.
Well, I had to do a whole chapter on him, and I could have done a book. In fact, I thought about it.
Right.
Because he is so complicated. His father was one of the world's great architects. He'd spent most of his life hoping to get out of the shadow of his father's, looming significance. His mother was a sculptor. I think the two of those were huge influences on his life.
Right.
But he needed to establish his own identity, and competing in this competition in 1947, he knew he wanted to create something huge. He wanted it to be monumental. He wanted it to be seen from many miles away, and he wanted to place his real stamp on not just St. Louis, but really on American and world architecture with this. What's interesting is that a lot of people don't know his buildings anymore. Like the Dulles Terminal.
Yes,
I don't think a lot of people know that, or Black Rock in New York,
right.
or the hockey rink at Yale. But he's probably better known for his furniture designs, which are still extremely, popular. They're on Mad Men a lot. And so I think the Gateway Arch and his furniture designs are the two things that people remember the most about Eero Saarinen, who died in 1961 before the construction actually started.
What came in second?
Second was...
it was like a park bench or something?
Well, there were two pieces to the competition. The first round, Saarinen was actually second.
Okay.
And a local architect named Harris Armstrong had more first-place votes. And he had the notion of a giant inlet that would look like it would reconfigure the whole levee and would look like the ground when a plow has broken into it.
Okay.
And the jury thought that was, quote-unquote, poetic, but it wasn't something that could be seen from, many miles around. And if you look at the entire competition, the only one that really is striking is Saarinen's monumental arch. A lot of architectural magazines were kind of disappointed in the sheer mediocrity of a lot of the other competitors. But that's the kind of hit and miss you have with an architectural competition. A lot of well-known people might not enter it because they don't want to lose.
Right.
And so Frank Lloyd Wright didn't, Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, they did not want to be a part of this. And because there were 172 entries, for 171 of them it was wasted time and effort and money.
Tracy Campbell, the book is The Gateway Arch. Criticism of the Gateway Arch and the decision. How much criticism was there when they finally announced we're going to build a giant arch?
There were a lot of people who said it looked like, I think you'd mentioned, a croquet wicket.
Right.
It was going to be, some called it the back door to the east rather than the gateway to the west.
Right.
But the biggest problem came when an Italian architect said that Saarinen had stolen the design from him, and that this Italian architect had designed a freestanding arch for the Rome Exposition of 1942 that was going to be a monument to fascism. And so that was the most serious criticism, that this was a huge mistake. Saarinen was able to deflect that in time.
Was it true? Was there any evidence of that?
There wasn't any evidence. And Saarinen said, arches are everywhere.
Right.
We started this show saying they're everywhere, but no one should be able to claim credit for whether it's the triumphal arches we see in Paris or New York or this one. And when you look at the kind of design that the Italian architect had and Saarinen, you can see there's lots of differences between the two. Saarinen seems to soar. It seems to come out of the ground. It seems to fight gravity. It's a beautiful work of art rather than a four-sided flat parabola. It looks like a rainbow, which Saarinen definitely didn't want for St. Louis.
The book is the Gateway Arch. Tracy Campbell, our guest. We're going to let you go. Last question for you. 8 years researching how it came to be. What's the one question you want to ask? The one piece of information you didn't get, who's the politician you want to ask, the architect, what's the one thing you want to ask somebody you can't ask?
Oh, I would have wanted to have asked Dickman what else was going on in the 1930s.
The mayor of St. Louis.
Mayor of St. Louis, an amazing politician who could get, the title of that chapter is Getting Things Done. He could get things done in a way a lot of our politicians today just don't understand. Now, the methods we might find...
Right, a little sideways.
A little, but he really wanted to rebuild St. Louis. Now he had the mind of a real estate agent. He was thinking in terms of property values, And so I would have liked to have interviewed him for this project. And of course, Saarinen would have been a fascinating example.
Sure. Yeah.
There's so much of this that goes unanswered. But that's the point of history. You don't answer everything.
How many people did they budget were going to die in the building?
Insurance underwriters assumed at least 13.
And how many people died?
0. It's an amazing story.
Extraordinary. The book is The Gateway Arch. Tracy Campbell, tonight, 7 p.m. for a book signing and a book reading at the Downtown Left Bank Books. Hey, Tracy, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
You got it.